of inspirational stories, talk shows, Bible commentary, youth, health shows, children entertainment, contemporary gospel music, extended times of worship, live broadcast, news, movies, drama, Christian ministry programs, and so much more. Hope TV is another quality service from Christ is the Answer Ministries with over 45% of authentic and credible local content every week. Hope TV is a sister station to Hope FM, Kenya's leading Christian radio station with footprints across the country. Tune in to Hope TV, where you look and live.
Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're tuned in to The Leader on Hope FM, Hope TV. We're also live on our social media pages, that is on Facebook, Friends of Hope, Hope TV Kenya, YouTube, Hope TV Kenya. Indeed, we are really pleased that you could join us. And today in The Leader, we're asking a pertinent question. Do we have a value meter for our leaders? As we count down to the elections here in Kenya in just under 6 months, do we need to measure values in our leaders? What about ourselves as individuals or as a community? As we had last week, none other than the Vice Chancellor of the International Leadership University, that is Dr. Tim Kirui, to help unpack it for us. So let's get interactive. And remember, tell a friend, to tell a friend, to tell a friend. Stay tuned. Over to you, Dr. Kirui.
Thank you very much, Mr. Modibo, and a good day to you, our viewers, from wherever you are tuned in. We are glad to be able to continue this conversation and discuss that very pertinent question. Do we have a value meter? Is it really possible to tell who is the right candidate to vote for or even to promote among your friends? Let me first of all deal with some skepticism that I expect may be out there, given the nature of our politics in this country and on the continent. First, maybe some of us may think, is it not too late? Or is the situation not already too bad? Can I really make a difference? That may be a question that you may be having, and is not uncommon. A second and related question is, how do I, as an ordinary citizen, stand up to the powerful electoral machinery that has been taken maybe 5 years, 10 years, or even more to be put together by some of our candidates? It's been assembled, whether it's to do with finances, strategy, people, or even just the party and all of that. They have already taken care of all of that. How do I stand up to that as an ordinary citizen? And thirdly, and maybe an interesting one is there really an objective way, an objective value meter? Some of us who may be a little older may remember that during the KANU days, they actually had a loyalty meter. It wasn't an objective kind of way of doing things, but if you are labeled disloyal by some of the other people, it didn't matter, And I remember many people asking during those days, why this meter that measures loyalty? So today we'll be talking about a value meter, and I believe that this will be a very helpful discussion. Let me set our discussion today using a biblical example in Acts chapter 1, verse 18 to 26. That passage kind of will frame our discussion. This is an interesting scenario that is very similar to what we are going to be going through as a country, in less than 6 months' time. This is a context in where Judas had been one of the 12, one of the elected leaders, so to speak, the inner cabinet for our own Lord Jesus Christ, and who had, in a sense, bolted away. He had failed the test. He had not been faithful. And so a time came, of course, after he took the money and so on. The Bible says that actually he went, of course, and hung himself. And so the other disciples are not sure how to proceed. They are kind of wondering how to do after that. And it is Peter who remembered that this was already kind of prophesied, in the book of Psalms. And so I'll pick it up there, and he says, "May his place be deserted. Let there be no one to dwell in it. May another take his place of leadership." We'll come back to that in a moment. Therefore, it is necessary to choose one of the men who have been with us for the whole time the Lord Jesus was living among us, beginning with from John's baptism to the time when Jesus was taken up from us. For one of these must become a witness with us of his resurrection. So they nominated 2 men, Joseph called Barsabbas, also known as Justus and Matthias. Again, notice their nominations. Then they prayed, Lord, you know everyone's heart. Show us which of these two you have chosen to take over the apostolic ministry which Judas left to go where he belongs. Then they cast lots, and the lot fell to Matthias, so he was added to the 11 apostles. Let me break that down for us very simply. First, they realized the need for better leadership. I think that's where it all begins. Are you convinced that we need better leadership in this country? After nearly 60 years of independence and having gone through all we know from the first blueprints that we have for our economic program, we know where we should be. But, you know, when you compare ourselves with South Korea, with Singapore, and other nations that gained independence at the same time. And if some of us will recall, the British, who are then giving us independence, actually gave Kenya a thumbs up, you know, compared to countries like Singapore, which had no natural resources, or South Korea and others that were comparable at the time. Of course, you know, those decades later, we know the story. So we know that we have a need for better leadership. We must be convinced about that. In their case, Judas had failed the test, and I believe that there is to a large extent, much of the political leadership has not served as well as a nation, and therefore the need for us to reinvestigate this place. So we must realize the need for leadership with all due respect to our leaders. Then secondly, agree on some guidelines on who qualifies to fill the role. In their case, they said it was important to get somebody who had been with them the whole time. So somebody who was familiar, who was committed to the vision, somebody who was tested. You know, these are kind of the standards. You can already begin to see some standards that they were setting here. And this is what will come to in the quick case of vetting leaders, you know, and so on, before they even go through the electoral process. Then, of course, they nominated possible candidates. Now realize these were the disciples. They have been with Jesus. If you actually read that passage a bit earlier, it talks about how they were already filled with the Holy Spirit. But even they who are filled with the Holy Spirit, together, they had been closest with Jesus. They had seen him take decisions. They knew the master's, signals and so on. They needed to nominate. It is not wrong for us as believers. I think this is important to realize that two well-meaning believers may actually support different candidates. There is nothing unbiblical about it. These were the disciples of Jesus, and they nominated two, not just one. And then, of course, took them through the voting process. But before then, they prayed. That's an important step in this whole process. I'm just setting the stage here. That as we get into this process, it's important to be prayed up and filled with the Holy Spirit. So that whatever we do, then we know that we have God's leading, we have God's signal in what we are doing in choosing the leaders. And then, of course, they went on to choose. After they had nominated, so to speak, they had prayed, then they went on to choose. So after we have participated in the nominations, we need to vet the people that are nominated, if they're not the ones nominating them, or if they've already been put out there, and pray. And then, of course, there's a place of choosing and voting freely. So even the disciples, again, remember, they are filled with the Holy Spirit, they are one team, but they still took the vote. They use casting of lots, which is similar to what we do today in terms of voting. And then finally, and importantly, they accepted the results. Once you have voted, you prayed up, you nominated, you vet, you prayed up, you vote, it is important to also accept the results. Because even though the passage just simply tells us that the lot fell on Matthias, it is very possible a few had voted for the other candidate who was Justus. And those ones had to accept that this is the corporate will of God. And I think this is important. Even though we may feel strongly about a particular candidate, when the process has been finalized, and you will believe that in God's sovereignty, for whatever reason, he has chosen corporately as a nation or as a community, as a constituency, as a ward, to give us a certain candidate. So I just thought that this would be important to set the frame, to set the context, so that we are comfortable about this process. It is very much a pattern after the Holy Scriptures, as we see in this particular example. So this sets the stage then for us to talk about then, do we have a values meter? And having understood that it is biblical to do so, the disciples did it, those who had been very close with the Lord Jesus Christ, and so on. Maybe first of all is to say, to kind of counter the skepticism I talked about at the beginning, why is it important that we be involved in this process of vetting? What would be the opposite of that if we don't do it? There will be no leadership for the process, and especially spiritual leadership. So whether it is the pastors in the churches, whether it is the ordinary believer like myself, yourself, we all have a role and a responsibility to guide. And we'll be seeing, of course, a bit more about this. And also to recognize that our new constitution in the country of Kenya especially already expects this process in the process of public participation. It has assumed that the leaders will go through this. So it's important that we do this. Also to realize that unfortunately, the political class will not be willing to do this. We know very much the case of nominations have been a bit of a sham in most of the previous elections. And of course, even the vetting process, we know sometimes it's who pays, the piper, so to speak, who pays their way, who gets nominated, or, and so on. And unfortunately also, and I would like to appeal to our organs that have been mandated and given public resources, whether it's IBC, whether it's EACC, NCIC, and all these other, and DCI and the rest of them, they need to do their part, not in a partisan manner, not in a politically motivated manner, but using correct values. If they do it, then of course they'll gain the support and the credibility and the trust of Kenyans. But unfortunately, I have to say here, many of them have failed the test. So we need to be able to do it because not many others will do it, and yet our nation's security, our nation's development depends on the caliber of leaders, like I argued last time, that all of us are affected. None of us is exempt from the impact of political leadership. So then what are some of the sources of the criteria then that you can use, or the values that we can use to be able to do that? One, I'll start with some that are national, then I come, of course, to the Christian one. In chapter 6 of the new constitution, it states lots of different values. And I want to thank God that was brought about by believers who took time to feed into the Vision 2030 some values that eventually were filtered to the new constitution. So you can already see that believers have already made a contribution. And I was very privileged to be part of that group and work with them, leaders who care about the country and who sacrifice their time and effort to be able to clarify those values. So there are already some values there, and the principles of governance that you see in the chapter 6 of the new constitution. Our national anthem is a beautiful prayer, but also embodies a number of values. We look for leaders who are going to make sure that there is plenty within our borders, those who are going to defend, our nation and so on, the integrity and, the image of our nation and so on. So there are different values, again, that you can draw from. And then the Vision 2030 itself, again, as I said, talks about a foundation of values. And I remember that discussion initially was that people were feeling that, these are feeling very spiritual. But it is important to realize that morals are the foundation for any development if it's going to be sustainable. Then, of course, we do have many other, things that have been put out. But, of course, importantly for us as believers, of course, is the Word of God. So ultimately, we must be able to see that. And so we looked at passages like Titus chapter 1, 1 Timothy chapter 3, that talk about qualifications for elders in a congregation or church leadership for that matter. And to think about it, how much of the resources do maybe people in a church leadership position hold compared to our constituencies, compared to our counties, compared to our nation? A lot more. So if the Bible has very high standards that we're going to be looking at for these leaders, I know how much more for those in political leadership who influence the future and, of course, the development of our nations. So in the year 2012, I was involved with a team of other leaders. Much of this was led by a group called ELNET, Ethical Leadership Network, that I was privileged to be a part of. And other bodies came in, KCPF and others. We worked on this process together. At the time, the World Vision also played a role, and others. And we came together under one umbrella to work together with church leadership. And I do remember that eventually we were able to meet, after we worked through the process, we had initially a long list of values, but we know it will be difficult to remember them. unless they are few and maybe easy to remember. So eventually we had a meeting with the church bishops, courtesy of NCCK, and they had invited others from the other umbrella organizations, EAK, and the Catholics as well, and others, and also the indigenous churches, OAIC. And as we met together, this was on the 10th of May in 2012 at Limuru, we were able to distill these many values into just 5 values. So as I present them, I don't take credit for them. They're not original with me. And I want to give credit to all those, there were about 82 bishops that met, and church leaders and others, and of course these groups that I mentioned that contributed to this process. But we came up with 5 values that are going to be easy to remember, that I'm now going to propose as part of what we can use as our values meter. And they are easily summarized into an acronym because they're sometimes easy to remember. BEVIP. Be VIP. Be honorable. Have the right esteem. Be responsible. Be VIP. BEVIP. So B is for blameless and God-fearing. Now we use that rather than use the word character. It's the easily used one, or integrity for that matter. Integrity is common, but it's a difficult term to define. Many of us may actually realize that we don't have the word integrity in our mother tongues. And so when you cannot sometimes understand something in your first language, it is very difficult for us to apply. That's why although we have integrity all of our documents in the nation, very few people really practice it. But blamelessness, and this is right out of the scriptures, in 1 Timothy, that an elder must be blameless. And we decided that that was maybe a better concept because it has a graphic image. As I understand it in my own mother tongue or my first language, this is a person who is above reproach. You cannot even begin to imagine that they could do something wrong, whether it's to do with money, whether it's to do with sex or power, or any other areas of responsibility. Is that true and of your candidate? And maybe what I'd like us to do right now, take a piece of paper or even just on your phone or wherever you are, and think about the current candidate that you like. Maybe the most emotive election usually is a presidential election. So think about the candidate that right now you're thinking about voting for and begin to score them out of 5, for example, so that in the area of blamelessness, how is your candidate? Have they been involved in any scandals? Have they been accused? Or are they clean, so to speak? I know our politicians use the term, ni mweupe kama pamba. Are they truly blameless in what they are doing? And are they God-fearing? Because we know the only way to sustain blamelessness is by truly being God-fearing. Because then this leader will know that ultimately they are accountable to God. Are they a person who show that they are reverent and they fear God, they are accountable to God? This is important in all areas. So this is the area of character, the area of blamelessness in character and God-fearing. That's our first value that you can use to check out your candidate, whether they measure up, blameless and God-fearing. The second the second value that you can use in our values meter is a candidate who is empowering and selfless. So I hope you have scored your candidate, by the way, for the first one. How much did they score? That's your own secret. Keep it with you against, say a score of 5. We are going to be checking that shortly. Then the E is empowering and selfless servant leader. We thought this is really important. A leader, in a sense, who is compassionate, a leader who is caring about the followers. Many times, especially in the political space, many leaders don't want any threat. And they have a way of eliminating any opposition or any likely candidates to replace them. And that's why we are devoid of good leaders. Not because the nation does not have them, but they find different ways, whether it is to make the play very dirty, so good people keep off, which is unfortunate, or any other ways, and sometimes they'll even, muddy the candidate and so on when in the public space. So we want a leader who is empowering and who is a selfless servant leader. And the question you can ask is, what have they done previously in other roles that benefited others, especially in a selfless manner? For example, if somebody was in a position of leadership, say somebody was a principal of a school, for example, and some of them are resigning to go into to politics, how was the school performing? Were they empowering of the candidates? Was it at an A school or at an E school? Because if E is all they are able to do, that's what they are able to, to bring even to the public space and so on. But also, have they been able to nurture other leaders? Are there other people around them that are equally, good leaders who, in a sense, could step in? You don't sense that void of leadership, empowering and selfless. Have they done something that have benefited other people, not because of gain and so on? And I'm going to be demonstrating how we did this. But in one of the vetting sessions that we had, we actually asked that question to a number of candidates. Tell us something that you did that was selfless. You didn't do it for your benefit and so on. And when they have not been prompted, many times you find that many people don't have very much to report, because much of what they do is for the public gallery, is for image and things like that. Are these leaders competent to be able to serve? Are they competent servant leaders? We do need those to be able to take our nation to the next level. Even though His Excellency the President Mwai Kibaki was not perfect, he had his weaknesses, one of the things that people appreciated was that he was not threatened. He was secure. You cannot be empowering and selfless servant leader if you're not secure yourself. If you're not easily threatened by others and so on. And because of that, we remember many people who would thrive. I do remember many cabinet ministers during his time who would speak with authority and so on, so it helps to have a secure leader who is able to empower others. So E for empowering and selfless servant leader. We'll go to the V. I said B, VIP. Then V is the next one, a visionary achiever. Do they have a compelling vision for your constituency, your ward, or the country of Kenya for those who want the national leadership? And what have they done? Everybody can tell us beautiful things now. This is going to be a time of wonders. They'll tell us maybe how they will fly through the sky or whatever else it is, all kinds of images. But what have they done before with the responsibilities that they had? Fortunately for us, many of the people who present themselves have often been in public space. They have served before. Let's look at the presidential level. Many of them have served as ministers or prime minister or deputy prime minister, different levels, deputy president, and all of these candidates then therefore can be checked against their track record. Who are they visionary achievers? They may articulate a vision, but what have they achieved before? Look at their constituencies which they have led. Are they model constituencies? Or are they backward and, some that don't bring, dignity to the people that they have led? Or any other places where they have led? Are those places examples of success or not? Because if they could not do very much with the CDF or whatever other responsibilities or the little funds that they were allocated before, how much more, how will they perform even if you increase the amount of money? You see, that quality of leadership. And we have seen before some MPs who have done very well at the constituency level in terms of being model CDF, or for now, the counties. We can already begin to see the counties are differentiating themselves. Many of us, have realized, since he's not a big candidate right now, I can use the example of Professor Kivutha Kibwana. I think, many polls have rated his level as being a good candidate. It's unfortunate, of course, he did check out of the national presidential elections, maybe when he realized the Kenyans don't quite value what is important. But if we want progress, we must begin to value it as Kenyans. We want to be able to support visionary achievers. What have these people done before? If they don't have a clear vision, we'll not be able to go much further. And as I said, if they are only producing E-level success, that's what we are going to bring to the next level, and so on. So visionary achievers. I is very important. Inclusive and just community builder. So the I had to do with the fact that they have a vision, compelling vision. The first one was character. The blamelessness in character. We talked about being an empowering servant leader, a competent leader, and a visionary leader who is has a compelling vision. I is one who, which is very important for our country. We have to admit that we are a nation made up of many small nations. And the issue of tribalism, ethnic divide is very rife, especially during times like elections. So is this a person who brings together the country or who divides up communities? Inclusive and just community builder. Is he or she a leader who is conciliatory? Is it somebody who has been seen to bring together the people and not divide us along ethnic lines? Can they be trusted to do that? Do they have a track record of being inclusive? When they have made appointments, were they inclusive in their appointments? Or did they only look to their own people, their own kinsmen? Those are the people who get maybe the prime positions. Or do they look at the welfare of the whole country? Inclusive and just community builder. This is important because then that's the only way that maybe especially the smaller tribes will be accommodated in our country rather than just being the big tribes. Unfortunately, we only see interest in the big tribes even right now in this election because it's not about including everybody. It's about, of course, how I get the numbers to take the prize home. We should never know something like the post-election violence that we had last time because we need leaders who are going to say never again. We are now going back in that route. We need right leadership that will take us there. Leaders who are conciliatory, inclusive, and just community builder. And the last one is a protector of family values. P is protector of family and human dignity. Family is the smallest unit of society. And the scriptures especially are very clear that if you cannot lead at home, you cannot be able to lead in the public square. So how is a person's own leadership at the family level? Is a family a model family? Do you desire that the leader's role model as a family leader? How are the children? The Bible says that children should even be obedient, for a church leader. And the same thing should be true of our political leadership. We should be able to scrutinize how are their children. And when you present yourself, you are now open to public scrutiny. This is not private anymore. And countries like America have been very good examples here that they will scrutinize even way back what you did in high school. Did you take advantage of other people? Did you offend or harass other people and things like that? Because they want to make sure that they are putting responsible people into positions of leadership. A protector of family values and also human dignity. And family is at the heart of society. When the family goes wrong, there is no more society. A protector of the family, but also of human dignity. Have they been seen to stand up for the basics that are needed for everyone? As we said last time, a country progresses by caring for the least among them. When you go to the countries in the West, for example, and now in the East, and in the North, the Northern Hemisphere, is that generally speaking, everybody has some dignity in how they live. We must remove some of the undignified situations we find in our own country. And only leaders who postulate that or who eschew that are going to be able to do that. They protect human dignity. They don't want the least among us to be able to suffer and so on. This election primarily is going to be around, unfortunately, the issues of poverty. And so we are looking at who has a model or an example, a formula, a commitment, and a track record of uplifting the least among us. That's important, a protector of human family and human values. Because that lack of dignity, nobody will be proud to be a citizen, to own the country, to support the country, to sacrifice for the country, if they don't feel they belong. So BEVIP, blameless in character. E for empowering, a competent leader. V for a visionary achiever, not just who talks about vision, but also has modeled that vision. Visionary achiever, somebody who is, has a compelling vision. I for an inclusive leader, a leader who is conciliatory, who brings us together, who sees the place of every one of us, because that's important, to build a nation based on justice and fairness. And lastly, we talked about a protector of family values and human dignity, somebody who cares about the welfare of the ordinary Kenyan. It's very important that we have these kinds of leaders, coming into office. But let me just then share a few practical things as I kind of bring my thoughts to a close. Let me talk about some do's and don'ts about how to use these values. It's all nice to have the BEVIP, but it's good to be careful how we do it. First, we encourage that you vet yourself first. Because as we do that, then we do it in humility. Sometimes when you think about this, it may sound like, oh, you're looking for angels. The truth is that we don't have angels who are presenting themselves. They are fallen human beings, and we know that God uses repentant human beings if, of course, they are humble and they trust Him. So by vetting yourself, you realize that even none of us measures up. By the way, how did your candidate do? Against, say, a score of 25, if you go against each of them, whenever I've done this in many churches, in many fora for communities and so on, and always people are surprised. Why was I so passionate about this candidate? And they don't even measure up to the basics of values. that begins to put back some head, some mind into this process, because the challenge with most of our electioneering, it is only emotive. It is about the heart. We are so passionate about it, but we've never taken time to check out these candidates. I'm not trying to say that we would neglect the process. We'll simply go into it more realistically, aware that these are fallen people who don't measure up, and so on. And of course, we'll talk about the place of us taking the opportunity to show, among all those, of course, the one who best represents your values. Then make values part of the conversation. Right now, of course, the question of elections is in almost every conversation in this country for the next 6 months. Make values part of the conversation. Don't just talk about the tribe the person comes from or the party, but ask, what are their values? What have they demonstrated in the past? And the BVIP is a good place to begin to be able to do that. Then work together with others. Alone, you cannot be able to do very much. One of the opportunities I had is to work with my community where I live for us to be able to vet the candidates for the MCA position. I didn't think at first it would be easy to do so, but I had felt that I wasn't being a good example because I was voting just based on party selection or nomination rather than taking time. Many of us in this country are guilty of voting for MCAs we never knew. And I think that's irresponsible. I don't know that I can be saying that that's a prayed up process and so on. So we just came together, began to talk about it as a fellowship in the neighborhood where I live, and then we decided that we would do it together. So you again work together with others. And I thought it was difficult to get the names of the candidates. I just went out and found one of the border riders outside of the estate. He knew all the candidates. I think there were 16, and gave me all their contacts just at once. So in one go, I had 16 candidates, names and 4 numbers. So I could be able to reach out to them. And I told them that we wanted to mobilize our community to vote, but we also knew it was important to interact with the candidates to know the nature of the candidates that were presenting themselves. Believe you me, that was the first message was sufficient. And you actually started just with a text message. You can see it doesn't even cost a lot of money. But they began to call me back. Tell me when this is going to be, because it's important for an MCA. And I told them we are a community with just about 200 homes in this neighborhood, and therefore we estimate somewhere between 500 to 600 voters. And for an MCA candidate, 500 votes means a lot. And so they were keen. They kept reminding me. On the very day of the meeting that we had, it was a Sunday afternoon. That morning, I could not even be in church. They just kept calling, confirm to me that meeting is still on, and so on. They are very keen. And they showed up, many of them ahead of time. One of them even went ahead and brought a public address system, which you hadn't even requested for. But, they wanted to, of course, partly maybe show their might and so on. But that helped us to be able to share this, to share with the other neighbors. We had actually initially just planned to have just a tent, and people would have to bring their own chair. So it was not going to cost us any money to host this. There was no tea or other goodies, and so on. So we make it easy so that anybody can do it. But fortunately now with the public address system, people could hear it from their houses. And it was possible to be able to talk about this and go through each of the candidates. And I can say for the first time in 2017 elections, I voted with my conscience for the MCA candidate. I knew them, I checked them out, and so on. I also worked together with others, just to give another example, in the senatorial candidate for Nairobi, being the county where I live. And we were able, again, to invite all the senatorial candidates who wanted to present themselves. And we were grateful that although many media houses had tried to do that, by coming together a number of Christian groups especially, and eventually we had some media partners and other people, we were able to get all of them to come. They wanted to be sure that they'll be treated with dignity. They wanted to be sure they'll not be embarrassed. So that's important. We don't use the process to embarrass them and to kind of shame them, but we wanted to be able to do it in a manner that's dignified. And all of them came. I remember that debate. It was hosted at the Desa University and beamed live on NTV. All of this was, again, loss of money, but when the vision is clear, many people join in. We know some of those media partners and other people who came and resource partners came on board because they believed in what we were trying to do. So it was important to be able to do that. And so work together with others, to be able to vet the candidates. Again, by the time the debate was over and we gave the questions based on these values to the people who are moderating, I was very clear on who I wanted to vote for as my senator for Nairobi. So you can do the same thing at the other levels using these values, of course, where we are able to. So, of course, ultimately, it's important to be careful. Our role is not to tell others who to vote for. Even though it may be clear to us. Remember, the disciples were all together, they were praying, they were filled with the Holy Spirit, but we don't see any of them telling the others who to vote for. They took a secret ballot, so to speak. They voted, with their conscience. So it is not our part to do that. And as I said again, we don't disrespect these candidates, even though they don't measure up with our values. They are still citizens, they are leaders, so to speak, on their own right. So we treat them with dignity and with respect, and so on. So these are some important thoughts, maybe as it comes to this area. I just want to mention that there are 4 levels at which I think I would like us to consider. I talked about self. Also at the family level. Ultimately, good leadership, and especially value-based leadership, is raised at the family level. There's a good researcher called Avolio who's done a lot in the leadership space. And he has a good quote that says that it is what is not taught at home that is often taken to the teachers in the class to sort out. So those of you who are teachers, when you have problematic students, it is because of the failure at the family level, at the home level. And then says it is what is not sorted out at school that is taken out to the workplace, to the supervisor or manager who now has to manage that. And because he's a trainer, like I am, he makes a joke and says it is ultimately what the people at the workplace cannot deal with, that they take out to a trainer, hoping the trainer can sort out. Let's do things first from ourselves and then at the family level. And then also remember, again, we can vet candidates at the community level and even at a church level. I am aware, again, of a number of churches that have done this and influenced, positively, using good values, the kind of candidates. In fact, one of the churches that did this, because of this level, there was a level of accountability. They had to agree with the candidates. We are going to open it up to all of you, but whoever then is voted, part of the commitment is to be able to come back and give an accountability report every 6 months. And any person in the community, in the church or community could ask a question regarding that candidate. This is the level of accountability that needs to come in and so on. I know in my own case, because of this process, eventually the candidate who won, when I call him these days, he responds quickly because I believe he sees me as somebody who is valuable in the process. Where did I get that sense of authority to hold him to account? Because I took initiative. When we get involved in this values process and using our values meter, we'll be able to raise the level of accountability even for those who go into the situation. Institutions have a role. I talked about the CBC curriculum last time, that the goal is to raise empowered, engaged, and ethical citizens. That's an important part. And I believe other institutions of learning have a responsibility to raise for us value-based leaders. At the International Leadership University, we look at leaders, we are raising leaders. Our outcomes are 3. Leaders of character, leaders who have competence, because that's important as an educational institution, but leaders who are also contextually engaged and able to bring transformation. So it's important that we also participate in being able to do that as individuals, as communities, as institutions, and even as a nation. I hope that these also have been helpful. May God bless us, and I look forward to further interactions around the values meter. Thank you.
Well. What insights. Indeed, this topic is one that you'd like to really participate. Remember, you can get interactive on our social media pages. That is on Facebook, Hope TV, Kenya.
Thank you.
And we also have Friends of Hope TV. And of course, on the chat on the YouTube. The question that we asked, and indeed have attempted to answer, is that do we have a value meter? And Dr. Kirui has said, indeed, we have a value meter, and went on further to unpack for us what could be some of these values that we can look out and measure up to. Some years back in Parliament, there was a discussion about passion. And I recall a member of Parliament saying, we don't have a passion meter to measure that passion, with jest. But I think they should have said, yes, it is possible to measure passion, but not in the olden days where you had some wazes in some corner who would measure loyalty by their standards, depending on your psychophancy level. And in some way, I would like to suggest that psychophancy can cloud objectivity. just because Dr. Kirui has said, just because it can never be wrong.
Right.
He has been. Without him, there can never be.
Yeah.
There were leaders before, there are leaders now, and there'll be leaders after this, to the exclusion of others coming into that space. The youth. I mean, if I look at just the enhanced voter registration that ended just this past Sunday, out of the target 4.5 million that IBC was looking out for, I don't think they hit a million and a half at best. Out of the 6 million that they had targeted, I don't think they go 25%. What does that say? What does that suggest when you have a section of the society that seems to have disenfranchised themselves by choosing not to participate, but that is a choice in itself? And here, I'm looking at leadership. Sometimes we focus on leadership only at the elective position. Granted, that is top of mind now, but we may miss the point because when does the rain start beating us?
Yeah. Very good thoughts. Thank you, Mr. Modibo. First to say that psychopaths actually thrives where there is no values meter. Because then you have this passion, or emotive feeling, but it's, when you actually analyze, like I said, with actually against a certain standard, even for people's own candidate, they begin to realize, well, they don't measure up even to my own values. So I think that's important, that I think we put values. That's why I thought this was a very timely topic for the Evangelical Alliance of Kenya to bring up, to be able to look at the process of, educating people. So that people work with values. And I think that might also address some of the feeling of, skepticism maybe, or even despondency among the youth. Because sometimes they look at, they can tell these people don't measure up, but they can see those of us who are older are so passionate about these people. And I think for them, they're not beholden to the past. They are maybe not as beholden to a tribal leaning or things like that. So they feel, I don't feel I have any connection with this person, and so on. But I think if we also have leaders who connect with these youth, they meet their needs, they focus on empowering them and so on, I think there'll be more connection in that area. So it is a challenge, I think, that our country has to address itself to then, because you don't want to have a very small proportion making decisions on behalf of so many.
That's right.
That's very important. I think that this is addressed and looked at. What are the factors and so on. I hope that some of us in educational institutions can do some research on that, so that we can be able to bring up maybe some of the reasons why we have that voter apathy, because I think we need to understand it well to be able to respond to it. Maybe the final thought I would have is that, and you raise a good point, we shouldn't apply these values only when it comes to elective positions or political leadership for that matter. I think first of all to recognize that these were values that were actually drawn mostly from the scriptures for a church leadership position, which again, in terms of resources and influence and scope, maybe is nowhere near the political leadership. But we have other levels of leadership. I believe the same values should be used when you are vetting people who go into commissions of government, when you think about institutions and institutional leadership and so on. Yeah.
And here, and I want to hold the Parliament to stand indicted here.
Yeah.
Chapter 6 of the Constitution.
Yeah.
From where I sit asking for a friend, I think it was deliberately weakened. It is there in the Constitution, but selectively looked at depending on the interest and the lens when it works for them. I think we as the citizens must reclaim it back. After all, the Constitution itself starts with the sovereignty of the people. We the people.
It's true.
So the leaders, but let me ask, are leaders born? Are they nurtured? Are they made?
Thank you.
Or do they declare themselves? I think as a starting point.
That's a good debate. In the leadership space, that's been an age-old kind of a discussion. But we've all come to agree that they are both born, but more importantly, they are made. They are nurtured. And there are those with natural kind of leadership gifting. We must admit that they are there. A lot of our politicians are very charismatic. They may not sometimes be people of good values and so on, but they're able to mobilize. That's how they come. They have that big following, very fanatical following and so on. But when we begin to talk about values, then now we are able to look at it a bit more deeply. and say it's not enough just to be a charismatic leader. You need to have certain values for you to qualify to be a leader, and so on. And then secondly, then to recognize that we need to have a leadership development process. And that's why institutions like ours, as I said, we are committing ourselves to nurture people who have character, who have competence, who have that contextual ability and able to transform. These people are not going to just perform at the point when they become politicians. They need to begin when they are students. Can they do something as a high school student, as a university student, with their immediate community? Can they help improve maybe farming methods or other things for the family? You know, at that level, if we don't learn to do those things, then I don't think a miracle will happen only now we started in politics that we begin to do those things. That's why I think that process of nurturing, and I think the church, other institutions, institutions of learning, as I said, CBC and others, and we have a responsibility to nurture good leaders when we spot them to be able to do that. I am here today, Mr. Modibo, because some people spotted me, believed in me and saw my potential and gave me opportunity and mentorship to be able to get where I am. And I think we must be able to do that. That's my responsibility to many others to do that.
I love when you said and made reference to our national anthem. We all, the national anthem is one, irrespective of who you are, where you are, when you hear it, you know it, you feel it, I mean, it's a prayer. But beyond being just a prayer, because we recognize, we can sing it, we can recite it, have we internalized it? Do we live it? Do we know what it really means? Is it within us? So that we don't just say to recite like you're going to pass an exam, with all due respect to you in the academics, in the academic space. And let's quickly look at the values, you know, under the acronym that you brought out, BEVIP. Blameless in character and God-fearing. Those who have integrity, because you cannot, you can't just legislate good manners, for example, you know. And we need to speak truth to power at all levels. It may have its cost, it may have its challenge, but we need to consistent, because then that becomes our DNA as a country. So leaders who are blameless in character, but again, is that standard too high? Where do you find blameless characters? We don't have angels on earth.
That is true. And it means that on that score, you'll know from the onset, this person has got deficiencies. Then are we able to put accountability systems? That's what governance is about.
Yes.
So that they're not drunk with power then, because you know that, of course, that ultimately can corrupt and so on. So I think we go into this space very clear. And then we are sure that maybe whether it is their running mate, needs to be somebody who can, because they may have those weaknesses and so on. I think we don't have any angels, as I said, but it's important that we recognize that character is everything. And if the person does not have good character, you put them in a place of influence. Of course, this is only blown up and so on. So I don't think we can underrate the importance of character, but at the same time, I think we have to approach it very realistically. Empowering
and selfless servant leadership. Sometimes you find one gets the feeling that, you know, right now, someone said, you know, the MP, you know, the senator and all the rest who never used to pick their calls, this is the time to call them, because they will pick your calls. They need that vote of yours. Their interest is that vote. You know, when it says 50 plus 1, that one may be the one that will just tip it in their favor. But empowering and selfless servant leadership, those who are empathetic, eliminating competition seems to be a tendency. And here, unfortunately, it can nurture distrust. And what I call, we have a very, here in Kenya, unfortunately, as indeed elsewhere, but we must really be, you know, truthful to ourselves, that you might find misunderstanding or otherwise when we have leaders who don't bring out that servant leadership nature in them.
That's true. I see that, and you mentioned the importance of trust. It's so foundational. Trust is based on character or blamelessness. And you know, currently as we are, our current arrangement is such that it's going to be unlikely that any one party would be able to take, you know, the prize home. That's why they are going to coalition making. And recently, you know, that in Parliament they had to legislate some laws around coalition making because of the trust deficit.
Yes.
Which is unfortunate that, we cannot be people of our own words. And that's okay. I mean, I think for national space, there's the place for laws to make sure that at least, that is taken care of. But if ultimately there's no trust, it means that when even this coalition goes into governance, it's unlikely to hold together. And we already have an example of that,
yes.
in the current administration, whereby the trust deficit was so low that basically that affected us as a nation.
And indeed, that trust deficiency that seems to to be very pervasive and runs across is also in the institutions.
It's true.
In the sense that we must be people who keep our word. And you can take your word to the bank. And when I say it, you can just believe it. I don't necessarily need to write it. But again, it works two ways.
It's true.
And unfortunately, when we then just depend, so to speak, on institutions that have a role to play in vetting, they themselves, in how they conduct their business, can contribute to the trust deficiency. And here I'm talking to or about the agencies used to fight graft, for example.
That's true.
Yes, you must go to DCI and get, what do they call that? Certificate of good conduct. But you'll find characters within who then now may weaponize that fight against corruption.
That's true.
Again, ESCC.
Or monetize it.
Or monetize it,
That's true.
So that they have a role to play, but they have to do it apolitically without, again, be seen to... Because those institutions should be here for posterity, for the good of all of us, irrespective of the administration, that is currently in place. And again, visionary achievers with some that you brought out. What's the vision? As an individual, do we buy into that collective vision? It's not just about flowery language.
It's true.
How do you measure visionary leadership? Yes, and here I think you'd like to speak to the history of what seems the vision, where they have gone, and can we buy into it for us to believe into the future?
That's true. A number of years ago, right now we don't have maybe very immediate context because most of the candidates have had more national profile. But I remember in 2017, we could look at the constituencies of those who are fronting themselves. And both of the strongest candidates did not have very good constituencies. The constituencies were reported to have very serious challenges. So here we are about to die for these people, but what they have achieved in the past is nothing to talk about.
Yes.
So I think that whole idea of achievement, because the visionary part, these are charismatic people, they can use flowery language, like you said. But what have they achieved in the past? Because that is more of what the country is going to become. If this is what they could achieve in the constituency, would you like the country to look like that constituency? Most of us who don't know.
And as we look at what they have achieved in the past, at what cost? Because sometimes there's an opportunity cost.
It's true.
I can be seen to be achieving, but I've been misusing public resources and others. I want to take ownership of the same. And inclusivity. I mean, we are a diverse community, and that is really should be our strength. So inclusive and just leadership, and whether the leader is a peace builder, whether they're conciliatory, whether accommodating. Right now, again, as we draw close to the elections, you find there's attention on the so-called big voting blocks, because then this will or make or break. There's pros and cons on the same.
It's true.
But the danger there is that then the community that only has 2,000
is neglected. And don't give an opportunity, which is not fair. So I think that there was, of course, that architecture in our constitution, but I think it's important that the leader can demonstrate. And we should be able to ask them, yes, when you have been in office, because fortunately most of them have been in office, let's look at the people they would appoint. Let's look at their cabinet nominations. Let's look at the people they fronted. Do they respect the diversity of this country? Both whether in terms of gender, in terms of the ethnic background, professional background, all those areas I think are important. Do they demonstrate that value? And I think it's ultimately because they care about people, and of course then there are people who also are peace builders. This country needs peace builders. With the kind of things we saw in Parliament a few weeks ago, and all the kind of things we should be doing. We need to teach these people how to transform those conflicts, into productive processes.
And protector of family values, protector of family values and human dignity. That is very key, because then when we interrogate, at the family value, because the family is the basic unit of society. And again, the human dignity is at the core, irrespective of your position, where you are, who you are, your gender. Whether the leaders that are aspiring for positions, and this can cut across. Yes, we're in an elective process right now, but like you say, these values, this criteria is applicable across board. So here, just being relevant to the season is yesterday. There is, in the Bible study, Grace Ojambo said, if you cannot lead at home, then don't export your mission
out there.
Start in Jerusalem before you go to Jericho. So if you can't lead at home, why are you aspiring to lead at any other level?
It's true. And I think looking at the family, because how they treat the immediate people is how they're going to treat the rest of us. And so if the person is not to be brutal, to be not caring, we don't see love, at that level, that's who they really are. Because at the family, we all strip away from the public glare. So the family is a good place to check out. And that's why in the countries like the US, they are very critical about the leader's own family, the children even. We remember President Biden, even the mistakes of his children are being brought to him to bear.
Yes.
Because he's responsible for raising good children.
Exactly.
And I think those are the kind of standards we must eschew and be able to allow that discussion, in the public space about the leader's own family, because if they can protect that family, they'll protect all the other families, in the country.
Indeed, because then we ask the question, do we have role models across board?
Yeah.
Because you affect, you influence, and let's not just have leaders who say, do as I do, not as I say.
It's true.
Because that seems to be the attitude.
It's true.
And be very selective in what you should be able to interrogate.
It's true. Very good. I think a good thought here is look at even some of the leadership challenges we've had as a country. With all due respect, when you look at some of our past presidents, where there were family challenges, those issues became national issues.
Yes,
they became entry points for either bad people to come in or things like that, or just that failure, meant that maybe the person had gaps in the leadership role and so on. So family, I believe, is a very critical area. And we should not, like you said, we should be able to say, well, thank you for presenting yourself, but we don't think you merit to be in this level. That's where the vetting process should come in.
And I love the part where you said now, the practical applications, the do's and the don'ts.
Yes.
And starting at the very beginning, vet yourself first. Score yourself against all those criteria.
It's true.
Because then that will nurture humility as you engage. And here it is about do unto others as you have them do unto you.
It's true.
Don't just point fingers. You have more pointing back at you than you pointing at the others. But get involved, get involved. And again, we must be a nation that nurtures, that encourages that public discourse.
It's true.
But include values in the election narrative. Include values in the election narrative. Let's interrogate and work with others. Vote with your conscience, not just emotions.
It's true. It's true.
Let's talk about briefly, as we almost come to a close, on respecting others' viewpoint and being accommodating at decisions so that you're able to treat others with dignity. What would be a comment on that now?
I think the first place is to realize and accept. That's why I decided to kind of frame this with that passage, in the scriptures. To realize that our own Lord's disciples had different viewpoints. That's why they nominated more than one candidate. So well-meaning believers, let me even use the example of believers, may do that, or even well-meaning citizens may feel passionately about different candidates. And there's nothing inherently sinful. Sometimes we almost tend to feel like, how can you be supporting so-and-so? What's wrong with your faith or with your value system? We are human beings, we are limited, and maybe we have different viewpoints, different experiences. So first of all, to realize that we may hold different viewpoints. I think that's the first place, and to respect that. But secondly, then to appreciate that as we do that, then it is okay to accept the different viewpoints and to say that, yes, we do it with respect, but all of us commit to the process. That at the end, we'll feel this is a corporate leadership. At the constituency level, at the ward level, at the national level, that I did my part and contributed my best. And if so be it, I accept that position.
And here, when we're saying we're vetting the candidates, accountability being nurtured, I've made a casual observation that we have certain entities that have abrogated themselves the role of vetting on behalf.
Yeah.
And then they will tell you which way we will go.
Yes.
So then you become spectators to be told which way we will go.
No. There's no place for that.
And you find that the danger there is that these entities may lead you down the wrong path.
It's true, because they are looking at self-interest.
It's about self-interest.
No, not about the interest of every person. So
no.
Fortunately, our constitution allows us, each one of us, to participate. And that's why I decided to give that example, that as an ordinary citizen, I just a voter in my ward.
Yes.
I was able to try and mobilize others to influence who becomes the next candidate. And even though my candidate may actually not be the one necessarily who won, I can still have the opportunity to engage with the other candidates. So even if he's the one, then he knows that there's that level of accountability. So that's what, for me, is one of the biggest issues. As we get involved in this vetting process, in having this discourse, we are also able to hold these people to account.
And indeed, you find that this vetting, nurturing, engaging, being public about it, but ultimately, of course, the decision is personal.
It's personal, yes.
And here, with all due respect, I think a big challenge that we've had in this country is the 6-piece or 4-piece. I'm not sure how many pieces they're going to be in the suit, because there are some places, if because you can be the right person in the right place in the wrong season.
Or in the wrong party. Let's be open.
Wrong party.
Yeah, and I found that when I go vote now with my conscience, I actually chose a governor from this party. I'm able to vote a senator from this party and so on, because I'm looking for the person who best represents my values. I think one of the notions we need to get rid of is the feeling that, no, if you put your vote there, it is going to waste. It is not your responsibility to put somebody in office. That's God's responsibility.
Yes.
Our responsibility is to use our values and in good conscience, nominate or vote for the person who best represents our values. The rest is up to God, because ultimately he makes those choices.
Participate, get involved, but the decision is yours at the personal level. And indeed, like you say, good leadership is raised at the family, the self, the individual, and what is not taught at home is taken to school.
At a public space.
To try and sort it out. What is not sorted out in school is taken to the workplace. And of course, then that becomes, the character of the nation, so to speak. And of course, acknowledging that the Bible has set high standards for the elders. So let's not just think that this is only for elective.
No.
We've got to debunk this. The season is electioneering, but the criteria, the engagement is across board.
It's true.
At the institution where you lead, at the workplace where I work, in the public space, in church. In church, it is important that we actually get involved. So indeed, when you look at the value meter, it is possible. But the question then is that, like when we are scoring, are these scores fixed? Do we become accommodating in giving second chances, so to speak?
I think we just go walk into it with a rational mind, with our head on, not just the heart or the emotions.
Yes.
And therefore, that guides us. But sometimes that also has, I know that when I went into vetting the MCA candidates, initially I had an idea of somebody that I could choose, maybe just based on their flowery language, their posters or other things. But when I began to listen to the heart, actually somebody whom I didn't know before, but as you get to hear their heart, I felt, no, that's the kind of candidate that you want to choose. So I think that helps us make that choice. Again, as I said, it's not a question of putting people in office as much as somebody who represents the values I stand for. That's important.
Yes. And as a church, we must get involved. There's nothing of saying church and politics do not.
No, this is in the scriptures.
It is scriptural.
And again, these leaders affect the church and so on, except that, of course, we don't tell people who to vote for, but we guide the process based on values.
And the comment on encouraging one who asks, how do I stand up to the powerful electoral machinery? Because it can be very intimidating.
It is.
You might think that your voice is that one voice, doesn't matter, doesn't count. Who am I? Anyway, it's okay next time. Because then what I can get, I will get when I can, because this is the only time I can get. And yet, the Constitution, when we get to unpack it, seek to appreciate what does it mean, because then you know, it is ours. It is one common document, so to speak, that covers all of us in it. Those clauses of recall, I will revisit again.
Yeah.
One should not fear that if the leader who has ended up in office, you've played your part, but the accountability process down the road in getting to see what are the milestones, are we getting there? Kenyan Vision 2030 is ours. Do we even know it? Can we appreciate it so that then we can hold the administrations at the national level, at the county level, at the ward level, measuring up, then you can know what to expect.
It's true.
So we don't just wait until 2022, 2027 to be told, to be known, because, you know, that silo mentality of hoarding information then creates ignorance, and we then become potential victims.
It's true. I think of two things. One is, as I said in my own example, just by mobilizing the community, and kind of I was the main person talking to these candidates. Now when I speak to them, you know, both those who won and those who did not win, they are very responsive, even during the 5 years, you know?
Yes.
Because then they partly begin to give you some sense of respect, and they see that you are part of the process. I think when we disengage, we almost have no right to come in later than to hold it to us for accountability. But if they know that we participated before, we mobilize communities and so on, then they are, you know, politicians are very wary of people who can mobilize the community for or against them.
Yes.
So as we give ourselves some, you know, we abrogate ourselves some ability to be able to hold them to account. And that's important. I think the other role for the church I was thinking is this long-term thinking, like you said. Many of these politicians actually work for 5 years, for 10 years. They don't just get into this, and they are nurtured and prepared over time. I think that's the same thing. You know, can we begin to do that as institutions, as the church, to prepare people for the future? Do we have a game plan so that we have people we can put into office for the sake of our country?
And just recapping the context as we now went down in terms of recognizing the need for better leadership. Because better implies there's room for improvement. There'll always be. Comment on that.
Yeah, thank you. I think you can only do that when you measure against a standard that where we would have been. Because we look at our peers, as I said, at independence, were Singapore, you know, South Korea, Malaysia, you know, these countries were at the level that we could be contrasted with. They had all had the same, you know, British kind of colonial power. And in fact, there are documents that talked about how the Britons saw much more potential in Kenya, say, compared to Singapore. Because of our natural resource base, we have a lot of land and more people. But of course, you know, years later,
we're still at
we have no comparison.
Yes.
And so on. So I think this is a failure that we must accept. Just like in their case, they accepted that Judas could not continue because he had made certain choices. And to begin to say, now we must do something about this situation. So I think there needs to be that concern, that sense of responsibility, and it behoves each one of us to do our part, you know, with what we are able to do, and then leave the rest to God.
And then, of course, like we said, in terms of the context on then appreciating who qualifies to fill that role of leadership. And this is where the standards come in. This is where the vetting comes in. And acknowledging that even we as believers have a role to play, irrespective of the political divide.
It's true. It's true.
Irrespective of the political divide. And, of course, the place of prayer and involvement of the Holy Spirit.
I think that's important to realize that's important that as I make that election, it's not just a careless process. I shouldn't just be motivated by, you know, the party or the slogans and so on. I have a responsibility before God to know that I represented him at the voting booth. And
of course, acknowledging that voting is scriptural.
It's true. It's true. The disciples did it. And they had several candidates, not just one, and then they accepted the results.
Yes.
And we don't hear very much maybe about Justus afterwards, but we know that he was still, you know, assimilated in the process.
Yes. And accepting the results. Because ultimately it's the will of God. In his sovereignty, he chooses our leaders. And there's a reason why we have the leaders. But if we don't get involved, sometimes then we find we will get the leaders we deserve. Not necessarily those we desire.
That's true. That's true.
And encouraging believers, Christians, to get involved, not just on the side of vetting or voting, but also
get participating as well.
Participating, get involved
Yeah.
because then you become the salt of the earth and light
true.
of the world.
Indeed.
Because where you are, then you make a difference in places of leadership. Wow.
Indeed.
What an insightful, engaging discussion.
Thank you.
Value meter for leadership at all levels. Applicable to the season because we are in an electioneering phase, but at the church, apply the same standards, apply the same criteria at home, in the workplace. We look forward to hosting you another day.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
So thank you very much from wherever you're tuned in. It could be morning, could be afternoon, could be evening. We appreciate the privilege of your time. Let's do it next time, same channel. God bless.
Hope TV is where you look and live, with an excellent selection of the best Christian programming consisting of local and international content, of inspirational stories, talk shows, Bible commentary, youth, health shows, children entertainment, contemporary gospel music, extended times of worship, live broadcast, news, movies, drama, Christian ministry programs, and so much more. Hope TV is another quality service from Christ is the Answer Ministries, with over 45% of authentic and credible local content every week. Hope TV is a sister station to Hope FM, Kenya's leading Christian radio station, with footprints across the country. Tune in to Hope TV, where you look and live.